Welcome to the first edition of Painters Unscripted, episode number 1. I'm Peter Darley.
And I'm Elizabeth-darley, and it's the 3rd of April 2020.
Hello Elizabeth, how are you today? Thank you for coming in.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. I'm alright, thanks, yes.
Good. Okay, I know you're an artist and I know you're English, but apart from that I really don't know anything about you. Could we start right at the beginning?
Yes, that's usually the best place to start. Well, I'm from Yorkshire. I was born in Yorkshire and I still live here. Although I went away for some of my art education, but I was interested in art from being as soon as I could walk, I think, as soon as I could hold a brush. And I was fascinated by all things visual. I'm a very visual thinking person. I'm very right brain, which doesn't fit into this world much these days. So I'm absolutely no good at maths. And I am absolutely terrified of mathematics. And also I'm a very deep thinker and I'm a very slow talker. So I really am not an ideal person in this modern world, I don't think, but I do have skills that I've developed over the years that have come from my personality, and I now know that those skills at last have some value.
Okay, that's interesting. So I'm just wondering, why should the viewer care about your art?
Well, I'm in the middle of a new project at the moment, which is called The Chapel of the 9 Altars at Fountains Abbey. And this place is a World Heritage Site. And Fountains Abbey was a monastery in Yorkshire. And I think when people start to have feelings about the art, when they're looking at what I've done or what I'm doing now, they'll probably recognise they're looking at something that's a new picture of something that's quite old, as in 1132, or no, the 13th century. So the chapel itself was built in the 13th century.
So what's in it for the viewer?
Not everyone likes the same thing, but the people who do like what I'm making will be people who are intrigued by looking at fine detail up close. Most of the pictures of Fountains Abbey that have been done many times so far by all different types of artists are pictures of the abbey in the middle of the picture or slightly off centre, surrounded by its natural environment, such as the river or the woods and the sloping hills. And what I'm doing is something quite different. I'm painting the interior, pictures of the interior of the abbey, and particularly, or only, the chapel of the 9 altars, or I should say the ruined chapel of the 9 altars.
Hasn't this been done before? I
don't think it has. I don't think anyone's taken a particular interest in the chapel of the 9 altars before.
Turner?
No. Thomas Curtin, an absolute contemporary of Turner, painted the east window, which you could say is a picture of the chapel of the 9 altars, because the east window is part of that building.
Do you think he had any interest in the chapel of the 9 altars, or even knew what it was?
No. Well, he was an atheist. He was a confessed atheist, and he was more interested in the French Revolution than in the history of the church. Thomas Curtin, and so was Turner. So I think they just Thomas Curtin did a work of genius, which is the east end of the Fountains Abbey, and that particular original is in Sheffield Galleries. It's owned by Sheffield Galleries, and it's in storage there, so it's up to them to maintain it and to probably check it over so often to make sure it's still being conserved and not deteriorating. And also, whenever there is an exhibition which would require them to put that in the exhibition, then we would be able to see it. But I have asked them if I can go and view that particular picture, but because of the coronavirus happening, all that's come to an end. But I do have I can easily see copies of it. The best ones are online because you get the light coming through on screen. So when you look at photographs of original paintings on your phone, you get light behind it, which is great for seeing detail and seeing the colours. But when you look at lots of different pictures or photographs or images of the same original, you'll notice that in each one the colours are quite a little bit different. Sometimes the sky will look slightly darker in one and lighter in another, or the ground might look greener in one and more brown in another. So the colours change, the tonal values change from image to image, because that's part of art. It's all about light and colour.
Okay, so excuse my ignorance, but many of your listeners will be wondering the same thing. What exactly were the 9 altars?
Well, I became Catholic in 2019, and it was a 10-year journey that took me there. So I visited Fountains Abbey before, being a Yorkshire-born person. So I've visited Fountains Abbey before, and I used to think, well, it's nice, it looks pretty, it's surrounded by woodland and hills and a nice river, and people seem to be enjoying themselves. But to be absolutely honest, I didn't really know what it was, or what a certain room was, and why am I going into that part there, and what's that part over there. So then I went after becoming Catholic, and the difference is amazing. All of a sudden the veil is lifted and I know what I'm looking at. So I saw a plaque on the wall which said Chapel of the 9 Altars, and we go to Mass and there is one altar, and the altar is supposed to be part of the stone foundation of the church building. So one altar is a very important thing, but 9 is a lot of altars. So I thought, why 9 and why not 8? Why not 10? Why not 7 altars? So then I started thinking, and of course 3 and 3 and 3 is 9, and you've got 3 lots of 3, so you've got the Holy Trinity 3 times. So it's very, very symbolic of the meaning of God.
But 9 because there were so many communicants. Yes,
there are so many people. They had a golden age at Fountains Abbey, from its first being instituted in 1132 to about the mid-1300s. It had a golden age of over 200 years, and during that time so many men became priests and were trained at Fountains Abbey, and it was such a success that there were so many people coming there to come to Mass every day that they needed 9 altars, and they would choose 9 because obviously they knew what they were doing.
And how many times a day would Mass be held? Do we know that?
Mass would be held once a day, and then there would be other occasions when God is worshipped through prayer, but not through the Holy Sacrificial Mass.
I see, right. So back to your paintings. So what do you think it will do for the viewer?
Well, we live in a world now where people have been encouraged to look away from the church and to look in another direction, to look at other things which have no connection to the church, such as being aspirational and to travel, to find out about all the other beliefs that people have, and therefore just like I was, most of us go to Fountains Abbey and we haven't got the faintest idea what we're looking at, and we wouldn't have the faintest idea why an abbey would have a special chapel for 9 altars and a great big window above it facing east. There's no way that most people would know that when they visit Fountains Abbey. So the reason I'm doing the art is to start a conversation, but to start the conversation I want to start people thinking. So when they look at the art, it's a type of obsession of mine at the moment, and in a way it's a deliberate obsession because I want to specifically focus on the chapel of the 9 altars at Fountains Abbey. And I say at Fountains Abbey because once they had the success of the 9 altars at Fountains Abbey, then Durham Abbey, which is now called Durham Cathedral, Durham Abbey then did the same thing. They said, we need this, but the reason we need it is because we have so many pilgrims coming to the shrine of St Cuthbert, which is
Are those the only 2 then? Fountains?
No, there's one in northern France, in a church in northern France, which
Any
is
more in the world?
Extremely intact. I don't think so, but the chapel of the 9 altars at Fountains Abbey is the widest chapel in Europe, I think, or at least in Western Europe.
Yes.
It's a very unique place to stand when you stand there. Yeah. And the thing I like about it is you can touch it. So what I'm putting into my paintings with the watercolour, there's quite a gravelly, gritty feel to, even though I'm using professional watercolours, but there's still that pigments feel, because a lot of the pigments in watercolour and in oils are made from stones. So that's interesting because I'm aware that I'm using tiny floating particles of stone which are suspended within water, and water is an extremely important part of the Catholic faith. And Jesus told us about water, and most of the story of Jesus is all through the Old Testament and through the New Testament through water, things happening to water. So I'm using watercolour to paint a picture of stones, and again, stones are very important in the Old Testament and in the New Testament to tell us the story of Christ.
Yes, and these paintings are for sale, aren't they? So what would make it worth owning?
Yes, they are technically for sale now. I'd like to have an exhibition with them all together. So
would you sell them separately?
I'll probably have to sell them separately. I'll have to come up with a price for all of them. But I am actually, as I go along, coming up with prices for them individually.
So you think it will have an effect on someone's life if they buy one?
Yes, if they allow it to, if they start thinking deeply about what it all means. I mean, this building that I'm studying with the paintings has survived the bubonic plague, which came with commerce, international commerce, in the 14th century. It had a devastating effect on life at Fountains Abbey. It nearly broke it. And now we're in the middle of the coronavirus, which is again caused by international travel, both commercial and non-commercial travel. And we are in lockdown right now, and it's still standing. Those stones are still there. Yes, you can think, well, Stonehenge is much older, but I don't think there's as much information in Stonehenge as there is in the 9 altars of Fountains Abbey.
I mean, you were saying people were coming and going and visiting. These were sort of the stop-off points, but they would have walked or had the pack horses and the horses, so they wouldn't exactly be coming over from other countries, were they?
When it was the bubonic plague? Oh, yes. The monks were the most intelligent and the most furnished people, I think, apart from the monarchy and the aristocracy. So the monks were very linked to the aristocracy and the monarchy in this country, and therefore part of their ministry was to actually travel, but it wouldn't be those numbers of monks that would have brought in the bubonic plague.
That was trading, wasn't it?
It was trade. It was the Silk Road in the middle of the 1300s.
So how's it going to make our lives better if we had one of these paintings on our home or office wall?
I enjoy doing it myself because I think this, one, it survived the bubonic plague and it's still there during the coronavirus. Two, I know what it's about, Catholics know what it's about, and non-Catholics will know what it's about. It's about God, and it's to worship God, and God is there. God does not exist in time and space. So it's a feeling of wisdom and eternity in our world.
Is this what your art stands for?
No, my art stands for my faith. So if people don't like it, well, it is part of my faith. And if no one ever likes it or no one ever buys one, then it's still part of my faith.
So why should they make it part of their lives?
Because they might start to wonder about the Catholic faith as opposed to other types of Christianity. So they might start to think, why did anybody bother to build such a huge edifice in 1132 and in the early 1200s?
Yes, these great abbeys and minsters and cathedrals, it's easy to forget that they were all Catholic.
They were all Catholic. Everything in England, or in the UK or whatever we call it, but everything in England was, and Wales and Scotland was Catholic, and Ireland, until the Reformation and the Renaissance, which is basically the same thing. So in England, about 880 monasteries were built, 55 of them in Yorkshire. And Henry VIII found them very threatening economically and had them made into ruins, which must have cost him quite a lot of money to do, but he took the land and took the valuables and that's about it really. He couldn't, and I suppose took the stones as well, and for himself, for the crown.
And the 9 altars at Fountains Abbey became one of these ruins.
Yes, it's a ruin. Now he deliberately left them as ruins because it looks more painful than if he'd razed them to the ground and it was just a field. So it's more painful to look at ruins than it is to look at a beautiful field or a woodland and think there was an abbey here once. So he must have known, as a warning, he left to everyone, these are ruins, so heed that. So then, to move very swiftly forward in time, there was a movement in Europe called Romanticism, which started in the 18th century, and it was part of the Industrial Revolution. And it was a way of thinking about what does the Industrial Revolution really mean to humanity, and how can we live with the Industrial Revolution and be more at peace with it rather than to just be frightened of the fact that industrialisation has come in very powerfully. So Romanticism with a capital R, which means nature, romantic basically means the look of nature or something about nature, came in, and then the ruins were seen as part of the beauty of the natural landscape because they're in the natural landscape. So they were seen as almost something created by nature rather than created by man. So therefore, after all these centuries after Henry VIII, of the ruins as being seen as a pile of worthless stone, all of a sudden, really, they became edifices to natural beauty. So artists wrote about them, painters painted them, musicians were inspired by them, and there we have Wordsworth, Turner and Beethoven. And the watercolours that were produced by Turner of Fountains Abbey and Curtin of Fountains Abbey are masterpieces And to think of that as watercolour masterpieces, not oils, but watercolour masterpieces, is very interesting. And that's where I am getting most of my inspiration from in this current project.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. This is all fascinating. And next time you'll be talking to us about what exactly?
I'll be talking about Turner and Curtin and why they went to Fountains Abbey and why they painted it.
Thank you. I'm Peter Darley.
And I'm Elizabeth-Darley.
And you've been listening to episode number 1 of Painters Unscripted. And it's the 3rd of April 2020.